When I really got into wrestling in 1998, one of my favorite things about it was that every Monday night I would flip back and forth between the USA Network and TNT, Raw and Nitro. Each week these shows were doing their best to capture my attention, and I would do my best to try and watch both practically at the same time. It was a lot of fun. Now, I didn't quite know it at the time, but this was a very special period in wrestling history. It's just too bad that some people can't let it go. Ever since March 26, 2001, when the final WCW Nitro aired and the WWF bested its competition, it left a void in the hearts of fans everywhere. And like some of their baby boomer parents, the only thing they thought could ever fill that void again was another war. From about 2003 onward, there were two basic truths most fans agreed on. One, WWE was at its best when they were directly competing on Monday nights with another show. And two, WWE has pretty much sucked ever since. But even though correlation is not causation, the prevailing theory was that WWE would only get better if there was some new competition in place. Notice, by the way, that a lot of these fans were just hoping for WWE to get better, not necessarily both sides. The most recent example of this was in 2019, when AEW Dynamite was set to air Wednesdays on TNT, the same night of the week that NXT streamed on the WWE Network. In response, WWE brought their developmental brand out into the world of basic cable to air on USA Network at the same time as Dynamite, and so the Wednesday Night War was born. Showing that they wouldn't kowtow to this newfangled entity, NXT underwent drastic changes and brought out the big guns to try and steal away Dynamite's viewership, only it rarely, if ever, worked. Unlike the first Monday Night War, which waged on for years and had multiple swings in momentum, the Wednesday campaign was pretty one-sided in favor of AEW. After 18 months, WWE uncharacteristically waved the white flag and moved their developmental brand to Tuesdays, which would lead to NXT 2.0. So yeah, thanks for that, AEW. In the end, the competition didn't seem to do much besides stoke the vitriolic flames of brand loyalty. I'll admit that my earlier coverage of those weekly shows probably did no favors, but my goal was never to root for one side over the other, just to try and give my honest reactions on which shows captured my attention the most. I didn't have a dog in the fight, I just wanted to enjoy my Wednesday evenings. And after all, is that so much to ask for considering all that we suffered through the last time there was a war?
What was once unimaginable is now inevitable.
Since 2002, TNA Wrestling scratched and clawed its way to wrestling relevance. From its humble beginnings in the world of weekly pay-per-views, to Fox Sports Net, to Spike TV, TNA slowly but surely grew to become the clear #2 promotion in the country. They seem to have all the tools for success: the stars, the money, the platform, and an undercard brimming with potential. But in late 2009, a dark orange cloud began to creep across the land, and before long, wrestling's little engine that could suddenly put on its big boy pants and stood up to the WWE monolith. It was a bold move that had many fans excited, only for it to end in swift and undeniable failure. I mean, just look at this chart from Wikipedia. Are you kidding me? It's not even close. I like how they still include colors for if Impact won or if there was going to be a tie. Lol. Lamau even. How the hell did this happen? I'm finally going to talk about it. Wrestling's second Monday Night War, TNA versus WWE. One last thing before we begin, there is going to be a lot of talk about ratings in this video. Now, full disclosure, I personally find today's ratings discourse to have totally poisoned wrestling conversation in general. Maybe it's always been like that, but for some reason it just feels more angry now. There is good data to be mined from trends, but in my personal opinion, the only number that really matters in the grand scheme of things is 1. As in you. As in, did you enjoy the show or not? That being said, ratings are valuable in seeing how all those individual ones collectively reacted to what they were witnessing on a weekly basis as we try to figure out why. And finally, yes, every company out there would kill for these numbers today, and no, I don't have the demos. Here we go. Our story begins in New York City, October 27, 2009. TNA Wrestling announces their biggest signing ever in Hulk Hogan under the grandest of auspices in the halls of WWE's own turf of Madison Square Garden. No, sir, we're not some rinky-dink Nashville company. Heck, we can pay New York rent, baby.
It's so nice to be back in the house that Hogan built.
The very same house that ultimately ran the company you later worked for out of business. Key piece of info there. That's right, TNA has truly made its mark in the Big Apple. Look at that sign. Oh, that's just a big banner with Hogan's face on it. No mention of TNA. Well, Hogan is the bigger thing in all this. Not everybody knows what TNA wrestling is at this time. So you know what? It's actually a pretty smart move. Tell you what, he's going to show up on Larry King Live later that day. That'll be the time to talk about TNA and his new endeavors. Talk a little bit about the new autobiography, but then the hard sell to total nonstop action.
I went through a couple days where I just hit rock bottom. I was hoping in some crazy weird way that it would be the glue.
Have you spoken with James Ray since the Sweat Lodge tragedy in Sedona? That is weird. Hulk has just joined TNA Wrestling, that stands for Total Nonstop Action. You going back in the ring?
Well, I'm heading over to Australia.
Terry, this would have been the ideal time to bring up your new signing with TNA. The company gives you this dump truck full of money. Larry throws you this softball. You're talking before an American television audience. So please tell us, the American wrestling fans, where we can find you next.
You will wrestle in Australia?
Yes, sir. I'm wrestling at the end of November in Australia.
Okay, then.
Hulk's book is My Life Outside the Ring. Jermaine Jackson is...
Things ramped up in a big way that December during Spike TV's finale of The Ultimate Fighter. There, alongside Joe Rogan, the Hulkster announced they were going to war.
On January 4th, TNA Impact, we're going wide open. We're going head-on-head. We're going to battle with a WWE Monday night.
January 4th. Why does that date sound so familiar to me? It's on the tip of my tongue. What is it? Was there some other historically significant event in wrestling that happened on that date, besides Wrestle Kingdom? Oh, it's symbolism you guys are going for. Neat. On one level, it actually made sense for TNA to step up and try and challenge WWE's dominance. After all, they had built gradual momentum year over year, and it was really becoming a show worth watching in many respects. Now they had just signed wrestling's biggest star of all time, so maybe direct competition would be the best way to bring eyeballs to the show. And besides, you just know that Spike TV executives were salivating at the opportunity to stick it to WWE after they left the network in 2005. Many folks wondered how Hogan and his friend along for the ride, executive producer Eric Bischoff, would possibly coexist with head writer Vince Russo after the Bash at the Beach 2000 debacle and the lawsuit that followed. Fans got their answer in what was indeed a memorable episode of Impact, and not just for the wrong reasons. This inaugural Monday episode featured a lot of the old guard, not just Hogan, but also the TNA debuts of Ric Flair, Val Venus, that old needle mover, the Nasty Boys, and perhaps most important of all,
Bubba Love Sponge Live. We're backstage. It's the second attack of the night. We got Rhino laid out.
Damn, all we need now is Jim Duggan and the Honky Tonk Man. We'll have ourselves a regular Hogan and Friends bonanza. But it wasn't all old-timers, as TNA made some other big moves. How about that opener? A Steel Asylum match in a big red domed cage that completely obscured the action, ending in a no contest. This is a Russo show, all right. But that paled in comparison to the surprise return of the immensely popular Jeff Hardy, back for the first time in years and most recently a WWE champion. He gave Homicide a big old dink to the head with the chair after the poor guy had already struggled to climb out of the structure. A warrior from the streets? Sure, but he was no ninja warrior. Of course, the big selling point of the show was Hogan's debut. They infamously showed his motorcade driving around during the night, only for Hogan to come out and say he was in the back all day. As I talked about in my review of Hogan's TNA run, he talked a big game about wanting to help the brand. Then we got a big confrontation with Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Sean Waltman before Eric Bischoff threw out the old format to the, let's call it delight of TNA owner Dixie Carter. Oh, and look, there's Sting up in the rafters. Remember 1997, kids? Please remember. Also in this episode were Bobby Lashley and his wife Crystal Marshall, who would both be gone by the end of the month. Jeff Jarrett came back for the first time in months to cut a babyface promo, only to be interrupted and cut down by also babyface Hogan. There was a Knockouts tag title offense by Awesome Kong and Hamada, one of their last before Kong was sent home and ultimately released after she roughed up Bubba the Love Sponge backstage for his insensitive comments about the Haiti earthquake. Wow, I'll sure bet Hogan was glad they picked Bubba over Kong, huh? The main event of AJ Styles defending the TNA title against Kurt Angle was great, and might have been even better had they bothered to advertise it ahead of their biggest show ever. Finally, the episode ended when Nash, Hall, and Waltman beat the hell out of Mick Foley, who spent all night just trying to get into the building, as a conflicted Hogan looked on, as did all of us, I'm sure. So overall, a pretty terrible episode that does not get better with age. Not exactly a glorified Legends show, but definitely not the best of what TNA had to offer at the time either. So how were things on the other side of the dial? WWE countered Hulk Hogan's TNA debut with the return of another legend in Bret Hart on that week's episode of Raw. Showing up on WWE TV for the first time in more than 12 years, he finally squashed the beef with Shawn Michaels and took a trip to Dick Kick City courtesy of Vince McMahon. But aside from Bret bookending the show, there wasn't really much else about this episode worth remembering. Needless to say, WWE didn't seem all that pressed by TNA's presence. The January 4th Impact was the most watched episode of all time, hitting a 1.45 rating with 2.2 million viewers, peaking with the debut of Hulk Hogan. Raw, meanwhile, did a 3.62 rating with more than 5.5 million viewers. So, war? More war? To the naked eye, it appears that Raw trounced Impact, but the Monday Night Experiment was considered a victory by TNA. Spike and TNA both smelled blood, and while the original plan was for these Monday shows to be quarterly specials, both company and network decided to go full speed ahead and shift to Mondays for good beginning on March 8th. Now March, that is the time to go head to head. I mean, nothing big's happening in WWE around that time, is there? No big important shows they're going to spend all their creative efforts pouring into to make it the best programming possible, regardless of competition? I'm sure it'll be fine. How did TNA prepare themselves for battle? Well, they began by systematically eliminating or changing everything TNA fans loved about the promotion. The six-sided ring? Square it back up. That amazing homegrown talent you have in AJ Styles? Make him Ric Flair light. Fire Awesome Kong. Fire Christopher Daniels. But for goodness sake, give me more Nasty Boys and Val Venus. After 2 months of preparation, TNA arrived on March 8th with what they thought was a killer show. It kicked off with Hogan in his first TV match in 3 years, teaming up with his new pal Abyss against Flair and his protege in Styles. It was the Nature Boy's first match in America since his retirement at WrestleMania 24, and while he still looked okay in the ring, all things considered, to call Hogan a shell of his former self might have been too generous. The episode also saw the surprise debut of Rob Van Dam and his lightning-quick victory over Sting, followed by Sting completing his heel turn from earlier in the night by beating Rob's ass for several uninterrupted minutes. Great way to put over the new top signing, guys. The show concluded with another surprise return by Jeff Hardy, who hadn't been seen on TV since his last surprise return back in January. And in pure LOL TNA fashion, the show cut to black before Hardy could pull off his trademark Swanton Bomb. Fans love surprises in their wrestling, but the thing about surprises is they don't usually impact ratings in any meaningful way. You're typically just popping your existing audience. That's why all those surprises TNA pulled out that week were for naught, as they absolutely got their asses handed to them. In their first regular head-to-head meeting, Impact earned its lowest rating of the year so far, garnering a .98 with 1.36 million viewers, to Raw's 3.38 and more than 5 million viewers. How did WWE do it, you might ask? Well, there was the build to WrestleMania 26, and of course that week's guest host and master illusionist, Chris Angel. But even that appearance felt wasted to me. This guy survived some of the craziest stunts imaginable, but all he did on this show were a few parlor tricks. Why not have him stand in all that pyro? My hometown of Portland deserved better that night, by gum. That reminds me, it's important to remember in all this that viewership numbers are almost never indicative of quality. Millions will tune in to a highly hyped up fight or ball game only for it to end up sucking. What I'm saying is, when the main event for Raw that week saw Vince McMahon beat John Cena after Batista and a million other heels helped him out, you can't tell me that Impact's the only one with questionable booking. If TNA was circling the drain already, WWE cranked on the faucet by week 2. The March 15th Raw was a night of big rematches from WrestleMania's past, along with the Bret Hart-Vince McMahon contract signing overseen by guest host Steve Austin. Over on the Go Home episode before their big Destination X pay-per-view, TNA pulled way back on the surprises, but they did give us the Nasty Boys and Jimmy Hart versus Team 3D and Brother Runt. What a treat! There was also some Hall and Nash tomfoolery, and Mick Foley shaved Eric Bischoff's head. The main event of AJ Styles versus Jeff Hardy was fine, but who knows if it might have done better if they actually advertised it ahead of time. Oh, I almost forgot. This episode also gave us an iconic moment of Jeff Hardy doing his impression of a cat whose paw got stuck in a floor vent.
I'm gonna be flying high on the backs of my creatures of the night.
After just 2 weeks, this war, if you want to call it that, seemed to already be over. Raw won the night with a 3.71 rating and 5.6 million viewers, while TNA earned its lowest rating in 3 years with a 0.84 and just a little over 1 million viewers. Boy, these numbers do not look good for Impact. I'm not saying the sky is falling yet, but this is a steep drop just from earlier in the quarter. Next week, you guys have got to do something really big and impressive. Something to kick off the show that's going to get fans interested in this big, action-packed alternative to the... My God, I had seen that clip before, but I had no idea that was from the Monday Night era. I had no idea this was them when they were trying. In all seriousness, the March 22nd episode of Impact felt like a big improvement after that ridiculous open. Things were building toward lockdown and a big Team Hogan versus Team Flair matchup. RVD and Jeff Hardy took on Beer Money, and Eric Bischoff forced his two biggest enemies in Mick Foley and Jeff Jarrett to fight to cancel each other out. And Foley even punched Bubba the Love Sponge in the snoot on his way out of the building. How can you go wrong with that? Over on the Go Home Raw before Mania, Pete Rose was the guest host and utilized Shawn Michaels to finally exact his revenge on Kane in that week's main event. Raw's rating took a big dip that week to 3.2, while lo and behold, Impact's number actually went up from a 0.84 to a 0.86. Hey, they held pretty steady from week to week, so I'll give them credit there. It turns out the secret was Magic Hall of Fame rings.
Thanks to this, I can't begin to explain to you the feeling of power and energy.
This revealed a big problem with how TNA was doing. This time it wasn't even a case of TNA viewers flipping over to Raw. They just seemed to tune out of wrestling entirely for the week. The wrestlers were doing their best with what was given, but it seemed obvious that whatever Hogan, Bischoff, Russo and company had in mind just wasn't working. And if you think things looked bad after that, imagine how things go on the Monday after WrestleMania. TNA didn't have a prayer on March 29th. Raw's number shot back up to a 3.7 rating with 5.5 million viewers, while Impact hit its fourth lowest rating in history of 0.62 with a little under 900,000 viewers. I wonder how Hulk Hogan's taking it.
Word travels fast that you're not going to be here tonight for the show, huh? When I'm gone, I can't think of anybody I'd rather have take my place.
Ah yes, the classic Hogan move of dipping out once the ratings go down so he can take credit for them going up when he returns. For all that talk Hogan had about change back in January, some things never do. The number one contender for the title, Pope D'Angelo Dinero, managed to outsmart Desmond Wolfe after Desmond's assistant Chelsea tried to woo him, claiming, quote, she always wanted to be a hoe. I hate to beat a dead horse, but bro. Earlier in the year, Orlando Jordan showed up for a hot second on the January 4th Impact, scored a couple of upset victories over the Pope and Samoa Joe that went nowhere, then vanished for a couple of months until this week's episode. And well, this was certainly a memorable way to come back.
It's Orlando Jordan. What the hell is he wearing?
Yes, this episode of Impact is perhaps best well known for the debut of Jordan's new gimmick, that of an outlandish, openly bisexual wrestler. According to Jordan himself, this was something that he had pitched to WWE at one point before his release. I would argue that Stamford dodged a bullet with this one. Over on Raw, the show revolved around Shawn Michaels' farewell speech, and there was a 10 Divas tag team match that went for about 5 seconds. I mean, it's academic, really. Alive but not exactly well, TNA moved Impact an hour back to start airing at 8 p.m. for the April 5th episode to give themselves a bit of breathing room. That week's episode saw global champion Rob Terry no-sell one of the grossest chair shots to the dome you'll ever see by Homicide. Then Orlando Jordan showed up to squirt lotion on himself. Yes, those two things happened in the same segment. The Pope beat Desmond Wolfe in less time than it takes someone to go to the bathroom, giving him big momentum for his title match at Lockdown. But the real hook for that week's episode was the first ever Knockouts Lockbox Challenge, not unlike their Feast or Fired concept. It marked the first time in history that the Knockouts title changed hands by opening a lockbox.
Unfortunately, Tara, that means you are no longer the Knockouts champion.
Not only that, fans got a bait and switch when they were promised that Daphne would strip on air, only for Lacey Von Erich to stop the proceedings and take part herself, no doubt infuriating folks who love goth girls. By the way, Lacey and Daphne would both be gone from the company by the end of the year. So, what's going on over on the USA Network? Well, to be honest, not much to write home about either. Jack Swagger won the world title the week before on SmackDown and went right on to being pinned by Randy Orton for the second time in a row. The Big Show and The Miz defended their tag titles twice in one night, once against John Cena and Batista, and again versus Cena and David Otunga, all while the audience seemingly took a vow of silence before the show went on the air. Raw's numbers took a big dive that week to 3.15, while moving back an hour helped TNA's numbers actually jump way back up to a 0.9. One of the last good times to be had for Impact during this war. TNA tried to get an even stronger head start on WWE with the April 12th debut of Reaction, a behind-the-scenes pseudo-reality type show that aired at 7 p.m. The only problem was that TNA forgot to tell their fans about the new show until about 2 days before it premiered. For their go-home episode before lockdown, TNA ran a couple of hotshot angles. Literally.
Is all about. Oh, God! He blew a fireball right in the face!
James Storm throwing a fireball in Jeff Hardy's face was a crazy moment straight from the days of Memphis. It was so wild that Spike TV actually censored it from viewers. It also gave them an excuse to do some clever editing, as apparently it took them 3 attempts for it to go off properly for the live crowd. Also, one of Hulk Hogan's closest allies in Abyss went down after being clipped by a car that I'm pretty sure was just idling forward. Speaking of cars, Raw fired back that week from London with the debut of Kit. Oh, and guest host David Hasselhoff. I mean, shit, how's TNA supposed to compete with that? The result, Impact's rating that week dipped to a 0.8 compared to Raw's increased rating of 3.24. TNA once again went for shock value on their April 19th episode of Impact, when Rob Van Dam beat Jeff Hardy to earn the right to face AJ Styles in the main event for the TNA Championship, leading to this historic moment.
5-star! Bam! Frog splash off the top! Can he do it? Can he do it? He did it!
RVD's victory marked the first time in 3 years the TNA title changed hands on television, so it was a pretty big deal. And if they're gonna go big, it was actually the perfect week to do it. That week's episode of Raw was drastically changed at the last minute, as most of the roster was stuck in Europe due to a volcanic eruption in Iceland causing chaos across the skies. The skeleton crew that remained in the States did their best to build that weekend's Extreme Rules pay-per-view, like starting the show with a 20-minute Triple H promo, and not to mention some wacky hijinks from that week's guest host, MacGruber. You know, that character from SNL, whose skits only went 60 seconds long, then was put into a feature-length film. That MacGruber. Will Forte, Kristen Wiig, and Ryan Felipe got to play their respective roles for the apathetic crowd, as MacGruber got an assist from his half-brother from India, Kaluber, or as Lillian Garcia called him,
MacGruber and Kalubra!
The whole thing was silly and dumb, as most of these guest host spots were, but we did get a funny line out of it.
America is the greatest country in the world! Yeah, and it's got the best movies. Yeah, like Shrek 4, opening May 21st, in theaters everywhere. I mean MacGruber.
The gods really seemed to be rooting for TNA that week and gave them one of their best numbers during this run at 0.95 with 1.3 million viewers. But Raw still won handily despite dropping back to a 3.05 rating. Hotshotting is not a great long-term business strategy in wrestling, but at that moment, it appeared that TNA was making some moves to regain their momentum. So how do they follow up on April 26th? Well, about the way you might expect. RVD cut a promo after his big win and made a bunch of pot jokes, which is all well and good, but the real attraction for the show was Abyss's new gimmick as ring collector, beating Ric Flair in the main event to take his Hall of Fame ring as well. Seriously though, I did kind of want to see Abyss just gathering Hall of Fame rings like they were Infinity Stones. That episode also saw a great Knockouts triple threat match, a continuation of Matt Morgan's heel run, the formation of Inc., and the apparent killing off of Sean Waltman's character from television. And how about the debut of TNA's new ranking system? Let's see how long they would commit to that. If RVD's world title win a week earlier took TNA to a high up to Cloud 9, then this week's episode sent them crashing back down to earth. Even though that week's Impact was a solid one, it didn't stand a chance against the WWE draft over on Raw. Once again proving that high quality doesn't always translate to high numbers, Impact cratered to a record low 0.5 rating, despite presenting a program much improved from even before Hogan's arrival, with more focus on the RVDs, Jeff Hardys, and AJs of the world. TNA on Monday night was a doomed proposition. On May 3rd, the TNA locker room was informed that market research determined that moving to Monday nights was a mistake, so the show would move back to their old time slot on Thursdays the following week. It turns out just looking out the window can pass for market research these days. The final WCW Nitro in 2001 began with a Ric Flair promo, so it was only appropriate that the final Impactro would kick off with Black Machismo Jay Lethal doing his famous Ric Flair impression for the first time, having been gifted his ring by Hogan and Abyss.
I know I'm the champion, but lady, I'm not taking you home with me no matter what you say.
Sadly, this was not the wildly entertaining woo-off that Jay and Flair would do later in the year. If it had been, it might have single-handedly knocked Raw off its perch that week. Instead, Jay backed down, gave the ring right back to Flair, and got destroyed in the process. Thank God Hulk Hogan showed up later to get some payback. The episode also featured Mr. Anderson beating up the Pope while wearing a church choir robe, Orlando Jordan pulling a gold dust on a Rob Terry cutout, a Monsters Ball match with AJ Styles and Abyss, and finally some explanation into Sting's recent behavior, that all of his attacks have been due to a lack of trust in Hogan, which, by the way, he would be proven correct about, meaning he was a babyface the entire time. And what was WWE doing over on Raw that week? Absolutely fuck all, except for Wayne Brady taking an RKO at the end of the show. If that isn't coasting, I don't know what is. The final numbers were in. TNA scored a familiar 0.8, while Raw went back down to a 3.05. Talk about going out with a whimper. Impact tried the best they could on Mondays, but ultimately they only hurt themselves. The idea was that by moving back to Thursdays, they could get their audience back, but unfortunately, their May 17th show only earned a 0.93, a 22% drop from what they'd been doing on Thursdays before the move. And after all that, after 3 months of beating after beating in the ratings, through the good booking and the bad, a lot of it bad, only to end up losing a massive portion of your audience and all your goodwill as an organization, you have to wonder, was it really worth it? I think my biggest mistake in my Hogan and TNA video last year was I didn't give him enough blame for his part in the tanking of TNA's numbers at a time when they seemed to be doing perfectly well without him. It's long been established that it was Hogan and Eric Bischoff who convinced Dixie Carter to make the move to Monday nights in the first place. Instead of working to truly help the TNA brand as he had promised, he actually helped stunt its growth with this rush to competition. This 9-week experiment exposed a fatal flaw in the argument for a weekly ratings war. In no way does it guarantee that all those fans who left in 2001 would reappear out of thin air to watch. I can't believe they decided to pull the trigger on this competition at the worst possible time of year, when interest in WWE is at an all-time high. Make no mistake, WWE gained nothing from this war either. Their ratings went down as well, partly because of that post-WrestleMania slump there always is, and also because the product during this time was boring trash. WWE didn't win the war because they were inherently better, they just had more reserves to spare. It had been 9 years since anything resembling the Monday Night War took place, and in those 9 years, an entire generation of fans was taught that these men in particular were bad for the wrestling industry, that what they did in that other company before was neat, but still couldn't compete with the glory that is WWE. And now, all those same men were back on TV, at the forefront of a company that was known for being everything that they weren't. Why would fans want to tune in to watch them? When WCW went to war with the WWF in 1995, the Federation was in a weakened state and could have realistically gone under had certain things gone differently. When TNA picked a fight, they went after the seasoned behemoth of sports entertainment, a survivor of a past war that by this point barely even needed to have good ratings to consider themselves successful. TNA gambled big on nostalgia, made their exciting homegrown talent take a back seat to the big stars from a bygone era, squandered their future for a past that wasn't even their own. Damn, I'm poetic. The first Monday Night War was a lot of fun to live through as a fan, but a lot of what made it so special couldn't be recreated in a modern setting, and just seems so unnecessary today when wrestling companies are already fighting over the same shrunken pie. Trying to needlessly start a war was a major stumble for TNA, one that in many ways they still haven't recovered from to this day, yet somehow they persist, powering through all the ups and downs to maintain an incredibly loyal following as they continue to do amazing work week after week. By the way, how did the relationship between Hogan and Dixie ultimately end again? Happy belated Hulkamania, everybody! We can only hope that AEW learns from TNA's mistakes and keeps Dynamite on Wednesday nights, because let's face it, war is hell, but war between tribal wrestling fans? That's the worst hell of all. But what else do you remember about this short-lived Monday Night War? Let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.